This
You have to get up this time. You have to get
really good.
California out.
Right. Well,
Exactly.
well, it is.
We finished each other's sandwiches. That's what I'm gonna say.
Is there anything else up on stage that you see that needs to be taken care of?
That looks good to me.
Okay. How many people are we in this panel?
Marie, Cornelia.
You are now. 3 people and a moderator.
You want a moderator?
I was told 4 people. So 3.
Because he's the 4th.
Okay. Yeah, including the moderator.
It's Marie, me.
Oh.
Okay, you and a bunch of chicks.
Please. Release the Actually, we'll just do that.
Yes, yeah, that was really great.
Alright, let's squeeze as close to the front as you can. Don't leave any gaps. Okay? 2, 4, 5. Okay, really close together, no gaps.
Now, I cannot vouch for this too.
That's why she can't vouch for you.
I'm pretty sure you have onset Alzheimer's, so that's okay. You won't remember
We're like,
What's it? Yeah, just put it. Yeah, but he's gonna sit already.
We need to defrag guys.
Good. How's the You've been in here all day?
Yes.
Is this set up how you want it?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you?
I mean, maybe. We'll see. We'll see who talks.
okay, I was like,
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, close the doors, you're all ours. I don't know why we're creepy there. The first without the
just convincing as a corpse eater. I know. That's why I don't like that.
That's how you get the corpse eaters. Like, no one will ever believe me.
So I just say see corpses first? Because there are many ways you can get there first. Just saying. That's not really an obstacle.
No, you just kill someone next to you and then you go for that person.
Oh, smart. She's got the escape plan.
We need
Zombie
to stop. We
apocalypse,
need to stop
she will
planning.
get
This is not a crowdsourcing opportunity.
I don't see why you couldn't. These things I have hanging out of rooms.
Yes. Really, it's just smart planning. Nice. We've turned cannibalism into a crowdsourcing thing. Yay. Hi, we are going to talk about fairy tales, specifically addressing adaptation, evolution, and absorption of the classics. And to talk about this, we have three fantastic authors to discuss, to throw questions at. What I'd kind of like to do is, our format we've kind of established here is do about 20 to 30 minutes of just discussion where I'll throw some mind-bending questions at our panel. They will answer them delightfully, and then we will actually turn the time over to you to ask some questions. The microphone right here in the middle of the room. If you want to wait until about 20 minutes in, or if something is just burning at your entrails, sorry, I'm going to go. We've started it. See, I'm just going to keep going with the corpsing thing. Then by all means, stand up and we'll start taking some questions at that point.
It's like the worst, not like romance novel illusion ever. His entrails were burning.
That's not going to work in a romance. Wow, that gets me in the
Zombie
mood.
romance, I bet it exists.
Warm bodies, that kind of
Zombie
thing.
romances do exist.
Yeah, there you go. His entrails were burning for her lustfully.
We can't. Look, I've already been on one panel where we discussed dinosaur porn. We're not going to talk about that today. Family friendly. Let's keep the PG rating.
Right. There's a child
Kiri.
right there.
Family rating. I'm just saying. Bring back GirlCon in 2013.
You know what?
Anyway.
There is a reason that I have editors, both filmatically and in my writing. Filmatically is now a word. Me and Sue is making shit up.
Noted. And there goes our non-swearing. Okay, so 2 minutes in, and that's totally a new record. All right, so let's go ahead and start with my immediate right with some brief introduction, who you are and what you've done, so that everybody may know you.
Hello, my name is Kiri Callaghan. I am an author specializing in dark fantasy mostly these days. With the lovely Ren Cummins, we're talking about adaptations, whatnot. We wrote a Peter Pan dark adaptation where Peter Pan is the bad guy because he's stealing kids and making them forget about their parents. Also in the original, he killed the Lost Boys when they got too old. Creepy. As well as a Alice adaptation, which deals with dreams versus nightmares. And I blog for Geek and Sundry about science and history and the nerdier side of geekery.
That's already
Yeah.
okay.
I'm done talking about myself.
I am Cornelia Funke. You hear my German accent, so I am originally from Germany. I've been living in the US for 8 years now. I have published 62 books, but sadly only 28, I think, in English, because your publishers tend to not print this printings that they can't sell for.
Good job.
Sadly, I cannot say anything else about my publishers. But nevertheless, I'm published in 38 languages and 72 countries. But I call this country my home. And I still have my accent. I write fantasy. I let myself be surprised by every new book that comes, because I never know what comes to me. I'm at the moment stuck behind the mirror. And the Mirror World series is supposed to take 6 books if I last until then. And I will travel on Fairytales all through the world in the plot. So the first book has as one theme the Fairytales I grew up with, the Grimm's Fairytales, and not the Disney version, but the European
The good
version,
ones.
the right ones. And even that is something that, the Grimm's already polished and changed. So I tried to get to the uncensored medieval versions. That was very interesting. Women are much stronger in those actually than they are in the 19th century Fairytales. And then the second I did on English and French Fairytales. The third one is a little riff on the Russian and Ukrainian Fairytales. Very interesting what happens in Ukraine at the moment. And the fourth will be me going through Asia, the fifth through America, and the sixth Africa, and then end up in Spain. But as the story tends to do whatever it wants to do, that may all be very good.
I'm the new author here. I've been writing books since I can remember, but I only recently started publishing them. So right now I only have one book out because I kind of am taking my sweet time, just testing the water. So I have a lot just kind of waiting in the wings, but I focus on supernatural mystery, but with the heavy folklore elements. So I have a lot of mythological figures and creatures. I really like the parallels between all the different cultures, where they all seem to have these archetypes that occur even in cultures that at the time period didn't have access to each other. It's very interesting. That's me.
Excellent. Thank you, all three of you for giving us your...
Okay, you can.
I was not! I'm so catching up with this. Okay, so, first of all, yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending here in advance. One thing I'd like to go ahead and ask, if all of you can talk about what was your very first favorite fairy tale and why did it speak to you? And we'll start beginning here with Kiri.
Horrible.
I'm a mean man.
I want you to look at the sky, pick a star, and say, that's my favorite. It's basically what you just said. That one? I'm going to say probably Snow White, because when I was a kid, I've loved research since I was very, very young, just delving into the things. And I remember seeing the horrible first, the Disney was probably my first exposure to it, and then when I could read, I remember reading Grimm's, and I started kind of just sort of getting obsessed with, like, every time I read it, it was different, and down to, like, where it's her actual mother, and it's just, like, horrible, and she's killing her in these various ways, and I'm like, this is terrible, I need more. Needless to say, I was thinking for, like, murder mysteries as well, so maybe that's where that comes from. Forensics on Snow White, how awesome would that be? I gotta go.
My first one was probably The Ghost Name. That's a German fairy tale, but I was completely traumatized by it because the heroine has a favorite horse called Callaghan, and the evil stepmother, who we know is always the mother, in fact, chops off the head of the horse because that's the only one the girl can talk to. That was for me already very traumatizing, and then she nails the head of the horse at a gate where the goosemaid has to go through every day with ease. And every day the horse says, oh, goosemaid, I was so sad to see you like this. And fairy tale completely traumatizing.
Just a horse. I'm so sad to see you like
this. It was not much of a comfort that it could still talk. But yeah, I guess that is, and that was the first one.
In the Disney version, the horse will sing. So.
You'll get its body back at some point.
Yes, but you know what? There is something to the Disney versions as well, I have to say.
Yes.
But because I do love the dark original tales, and of course they are very much a historical tale also. Whereas the Disney tales were from our time. And in some ways I do sometimes like what they try to do. Make the world a little nicer. And we all know that feeling that sometimes we can only bear the Disney version. There are days for the Grimms and there are days for the Disney.
I guess my first one would be Sleeping Beauty, the Disney version, because I was really young. But I really like the fairies and the evil fairy, and that kind of introduced me to this whole world of the fae. They have their own world, and they're just this really mysterious, completely inhuman, but still so similar to the extreme to humans. And so that got me into Romanian fairy tales, oddly enough. And there's one called the Fairy Aurora. It deals with this entire other world where he's this prince riding to find a fairy Aurora. And he goes through a copper forest, where everything's copper. He goes through a silver forest, and all the plants and everything are silver, and a gold forest. And then comes upon this. I can't describe it because it's just way too detailed. But just the other worldliness of it, all the different creatures and encounters, really interesting.
The older the tales get, the more interesting. Because they decipher them and not decipher them. It's so sad that most people just know the usual tales. When people say, oh, you work with fairy tales, they think we work with about 2 or 3, like Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, right, and maybe Little Red Riding Hood, which is interesting. I read an old tale, a version of Little Red Riding Hood, where the girl, of course, course knows the wolf is the wolf and not the grandmother. And of course she saves herself. And she runs out of the house and wolves is after her. And there are women sitting washing clothes at the river. And they spread the cloth over the water and the girl runs and escapes. And then the women take the cloth back and run. That's probably one of the oldest versions. And suddenly, in comes the stupid vain girl with a little red head, runs through the forest, and hello, hello, here I am. She does not know the difference between a wolf and a grandmother.
And grandmother
man. Yes, it is.
I see what you do there, history.
So it's very interesting. We were always taught that, okay, women, now we'll get a few rights, but it used to be not. When you read from 13th and 14th century, you're surprised how independent girls and women often were, because the men were so happy to do wars and running off for crusades and dying very young, and therefore the girls and women were often alone at a very young age and very politically powerful, because the men mostly transferred all their property to the woman and the political power because they knew they'd die young. So it's a very interesting thing that the world was quite different from what we imagined. And they were often 17 when they came to power, which means that's why they love to think they are immortal, because they were so young, and they went through all the time, and then found out they're not.
Men are pretty stupid.
No, the women would do exactly the same thing if they had some power.
It's humanity.
Yeah, I would never say men are more stupid than women, no.
So when you go about choosing a fairy tale that you'd like to adapt, or a folk tale that you'd like to draw or extrapolate something from, what approach do you use when you sit down to examine this fairy tale and say, well, how can I use this? How can I twist this? How can I make this my own?
I dissect it a lot. Like any like noun or trope, or even if they mention something like just an object, like if I were to do something about Snow White, I would have done a ton of research on apples, just to look at various other mythologies around them. And research is my rabbit hole. Like the amazing things you can find and then you don't even realize you remember is insane. Like when you're writing, you're like, oh, I need to go look that up, and you find a connection that you had subconsciously made to something else. You're like, oh my gosh, did I do that on purpose? Who knows? But it's beautiful and brilliant, and I'm going to pretend like it is.
And the only danger is to crash that subconscious and unconscious thing that you do by too much research.
Exactly.
So you always have to keep it balanced, right? So that the unconscious set comes, as you say. And then suddenly, I remember people saying to me, that's so well in book one, and it's not been book two, as I had not done anything. That's just
No, that's where you just laughed.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
I did.
what happened.
I'm just that good.
I think it's Tom Stoppard has this great quote. He wrote Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead. If you're not familiar with it, it's amazing.
Yes.
But people were like, oh, and this thing was here, and this thing was here, and he was talking about it, and I believe the quote is, it was like a train station manager was unpacking my bags and accusing me of all these things, and while I couldn't deny all that luggage was there, I don't remember packing them. It was just like, yep, that's so beautiful.
Yes,
Right?
it's so beautiful. Yes. So I mostly don't do the research on, I do that in general, but on fairy tales I mostly just use them almost like playing with them. So I riff on them, but I don't look too closely because I'm so afraid I would lose that subconscious thing. But I also, as I use many, I don't focus on one. If I would focus on one, exactly, I would look at the apples, I would look at it all. But as I do it more, for example, now when I did the third book, I was like, okay, they're going through Ukraine. Okay, Baba Yaga, yes, what has to be that? Firebirds in Russia, probably. Flying grey wolf. Okay, but sometimes I just mention it. Or I have a prison where there's one in a cage, and that's all. And and not more.
A nice polite nod, but not over stimulating.
And then making up my own characters, and then having people guess, what did you make that?
I love that actually. You don't create that freedom, and you get that feel of you're in a fairy tale without being restricted to what it
and
originally
just
gave you.
repeating.
Yeah.
Exactly, because I think we're all storytellers, so we want to create the next one. And what we do is try to keep just the atmosphere feel, like you say, yeah, okay, you write through copper wood, but you do it with a woman from the 21st century writing through that copper wood. So you will already bring something new. And I love that when that happens. You lie with the old story and you bring something new.
That's pretty much exactly what I think. Unless I'm going for something specific, I will, like you said, dissect it, but I will dissect the daylights out of it. And I will come down to its basest elements and then look, like I said, for those parallels to other cultures. Sometimes they bring something different to it that other culture didn't, and it kind of sheds this new light when you read the original one.
And it's interesting the parallels you find where you're like, was that even intentional? Did this crop up independently? Like the legend of, the mythology of dragons, weirdly, I was just doing research on this, cropped up in many cultures completely independently of each other. And you're like, how is that even, they all have elements that are the same in some ways. And
But the Western is always a trash, and the Western dragons are always the devil.
yeah.
Whereas the
This is
Eastern
interesting.
dragon is
It's
always
always
nature,
good,
not to
and-
be conquered,
Yeah.
but to be, it's very interesting.
There's some interesting
Right.
cultural influences.
It's
But
like
like the
you're-
bare bones, you're like, how is that the same?
Yeah, the Western say, I have to enslave the dragon, and the Eastern says, I can ride the back of the dragon. It's very
I will
different.
worship it
Yes.
and be its tutor.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
student. Words are hard, go.
Especially for writers. And use them up all the time.
I have no more, Con. I've used my quota. Take me away. I'm gonna just throw you off, apparently.
I was not quite sure to follow up. What would you say is the purpose of a fairy tale? They're all, just like the dragon, they're all throughout history, they're all throughout cultures. Every culture has them. Why do we have them?
Well, originally I know a lot of times it was to teach morality lessons, but like right now I kind of like think it's to keep alive a sense of wonderment with the world around you. You have these stories that have been passed down through the ages that have impossible things happen. And I don't know, I like that idea that we keep them alive because we want to believe in impossible things.
I think that also very much about our very own fears. Fears of the dark, fear of the forest, fear of the hunger. So in an interesting way, it reminds us of that. We sometimes forget that there is a fear like that. And what they do is almost like a time machine into our past. And they bring us all the old gods back, all the old spirits. What I also find in Fairytales, people were so much more connected to nature. Because nature is so threatening, and they're so dependent on it. And you find that. And what I find most interesting is that there is mostly no death in Fairytales. So they come back all the time. So the cycle, they still know about the cycle, that everything is recycled, including humans, including spirit. It all comes back and back and back and back, and always in different shape. So you have constantly shapeshifters. You have people chopped in 100 pieces, thrown into a pot, and coming out again. This kind of thinking, I love that so much more. That thinking that everything constantly returns and takes more shape. So I think because they were so close to nature, and we live in a world that has the illusion, it was always built by humans, we can completely control the world, we know exactly what to do, we just rebuild it. It is a good reminder, Fairytales is a good reminder. It may not be that way.
I think a lot of them are also cautionary tales. A lot of them also, it seems like a way to personify or explain something or unknowns. I really know a whole lot about nature.
Or there's one tale.
Mythology especially was like, we don't know how to explain this. God.
Yeah,
Echoes are from this girl who lost her voice and could only repeat what other people say. Yes, brilliant, do it, go with it.
The wonderful thing is they explain to you things without explaining.
Yeah.
So it's so multi-layered, the truths, that they put it in an image, and all the truth is in there, although we cannot really spell it out. Because we are so used to rationalize everything and explain everything, and it is much too multi-layered, the truth, to do that. I once read a tale where a girl gets her arms chopped off at the beginning and pushed into the forest with her child and without the arms. So the girl learns to alone, without the arms, live with her child in the forest, and then her arms grow back. So that's all in there, in that image, everything is in there.
So gory and fantastic.
Right? And it's just like, oh yeah, we know that feeling, we don't have arms, right? We depend and then suddenly we grow them. That feeling, and that's why, there's so much truth, which can be very exciting.
It's such a heartwarming panel, but also bloody, and I love that.
That's the usual mix, isn't it?
I know, right? It is a fairy tale.
Yeah, when they ask you, why are you so cool in the book sometimes,
You live in it, come on.
So here's a question. All the fairy tales that we're really familiar with tend to be written or spoken or conceived of hundreds of years ago, way back when I guess we have more of a bardic tradition. What about, to you,
Sorry,
what?
I appreciate it.
What would you say is keeping us, or do we have, modern fairy tales? And if we have modern fairy tales, what are those and what shape do they take now?
Yeah, we have quite modern fairy tales with Oscar Wilde and Hans Christian Andersen. Because they are barely 100 years old, or a little bit more. And they are probably the most modern version I know of an incredibly convincing fairy tale. And many people would probably say, oh yeah, the fairy tale. Why did you not use the Hans Christian Andersen tales? I say, well, these are not really folk tales.
Yeah.
He made them up. They are art tales. You call them in German art fairy tales because they were created by one writer. And Oscar Wilde is another example. It's just fantastic on his fairy tales. They feel like they could be so old, and I think it's such a craft. And I said sometimes we can still do that. You just need a certain kind of language and a certain kind of speed, and you also need to tell to every age, like completely ages, and then you get it right.
Or even, not sure if I call it like fairy tales as much as mythology, but Tolkien definitely. He created an entire mythology essentially for England. It's like, how can you have the cool things the Norse do? We want that.
Why don't we just take it? That's what the English always do.
You make that sound like a bad thing.
They're so bad. And they are so good.
Write
We
down
love them
everything
and we
you say.
hate them, yes.
Sorry, I just need a moment. Just write down everything you ever say. Just take it. You can just take everything. So,
Risk.
Yes.
Build up, build up.
We sometimes forget that they once were the greatest empire that
They
ever
were.
existed on Earth. We so easily forget that. And we're like, oh, the Romans, the Mongols. No.
English.
The English.
Now they're just so quaint.
And they're so bad at plumbing.
but they gave us Doctor Who, so I
Sherlock.
I'm Sherlock.
My daughter is
Harry
not
Potter.
there. My other soul is English, but when I'm there, I sometimes say to them, that's why you lost the colonies.
It was just keeping them hard.
Each time it's your Independence Day says, oh, today we lost the colonies.
I have to go for a drink. It's a hard day
And thank you. So we are we're about 25, almost 30 minutes in. If you have any questions, you can please start lining up in the middle, or we could just keep talking. Either way, to be honest.
They are very shy.
Right?
Yeah, start it off.
Yay!
Wear your fandom's proud.
I am Luna. Of course you start us off.
I was in your thing yesterday. I was the teacher. Anyway, so I am an English teacher, so I like to ask questions to writers about how to help my kids learn to write better. And a bunch of them come in reading books that are based off fairy tales and are now modern renditions, which is exciting. I like talking to them because I read all the old ones when I was younger and in college. But anyway, you mentioned that a lot of them are like started off as cautionary tales or like morality based, and so they do have these like darker stories because it's like this could happen to you. Do you think it's, I don't know, like better or more interesting to keep those dark endings in the modern day setting, or like more with Disney kind of has a happier ending because it's like
Serve your story.
Yeah. Okay.
Honestly, I mean, if it serves the story. I hate things that do stuff just to make you cry. Like, it doesn't actually serve the story, really. It just like, and now we're gonna do one last jerk thing just to make you sad. But I also come from a theater background, and it's like, I get off my soul, like, tell me a story, don't, like, make me feel like dance, puppet dance. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also the fairy tales do have a good ending.
Yeah.
You know? And they pull it off in a very weird way sometimes, and they are so revengeful and cruel, you know, and they are not ashamed of being of darkest human nature and show us all that.
Roald Dahl, I would also say, is kind of
Oh,
a modern
yeah.
fairy tale.
Oh, yes.
It usually reminded me of The Witches and how like it ends with him as
Oh, the
sorry,
giant,
spoilers.
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
They have these like bittersweet endings, but it's like what that character wanted, so they're happy, even though it might be not be like a pretty little bow
Oh,
ending.
yes.
Love him.
Yes.
Yeah, but all those kids didn't actually. I recall
Not
correctly,
saying
in
it's
the book they
entirely
don't
bad.
survive. Liam Newcomb's going, you're a terrible little child, die. Be good to your parents.
So this question is going to be slightly off topic, but it's still in the realm of mythology. How do you see, is it useful to use like mythology as a way to tell the reader about your world's history? Do you think that's a valid way to use mythology inside of a fictional world?
That you mean that we make the mythology
Yeah.
the history of your world?
Yeah, a literary device inside your writing, yes.
Yeah, but
Not sure I know what you're asking, to be honest.
no.
Sort of like, I went to the Writing Better Dialogue channel earlier. Kind of like using dialogue as a literary device.
So you mean like tell the history like in an
Yeah.
exposition but in a mythology base?
Yeah,
Once upon a time. And
yeah, inside your
Ah,
story.
right.
Like the King Killer Chronicle?
Yeah, or
Like how
the
he
Mother
does it
Mary.
mad, is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about?
Where they explain it through a character telling it.
Right, so like where he has his own mythology and then the character himself explores that mythology as well as exploring the morals of the story. Is that what you're trying to
Yeah.
get at? Okay.
I'm still not. I want to answer this and I'm like going.
A play within a
I
play.
think I can
Your
translate.
mythology is within your own mythology.
Yes.
As long as you don't get mired in exposition, I would say, because
Yeah.
that, a lot of, like, I love Tolkien, I really do, but I always joke around that Lord of the Rings is essentially a tour of Middle Earth
Yes.
that happens occasionally upon plot. Oh, and the trees and the elven music, and oh, what's this? Oh, a ring, fantastic. Oh, and this.
Wait, I know a poem about that. Shut up, just walk us there. Hey,
He's
don't
very
you know
dense in
eagles?
that book.
You know eagles. Fly us there. Come on.
Exploring the whole history of your world, sometimes it drowns your plot
Yes.
completely.
Yeah.
And sometimes you should. I think fantasy readers tend to forgive that, absolutely,
Yes.
because they want to know about the world. I remember sometimes when I create a new world, people are like, Cornelia, we want to know more, we want to know more. And you're like, oh God, I thought you were getting rid of all that in.
Yeah.
But they tend to want it, you know, but I try to weave it in while I'm going.
And sometimes if you don't want to put it in the actual book, you can put it on your website.
Something, or do short story
Yeah.
on the
Ooh,
side.
short
That's
stories
a
are amazing
wonderful.
for that.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful tool, right? To explore the corners where you don't put the camera, and make the world richer and richer and richer because it's too big in your head.
Yes.
Prequels. The Hobbit.
Sorry that took us so long to get behind
Yeah.
the rest. We're still like
Kind
kind
of confusing that.
You mentioned that there's darker and more clever tales than the grand fairy tales. Where would you recommend we were able to find and study those?
I looked online. We did research online on fairy tale forums and found things I sometimes did not find in books. But there are also a lot of books out there exploring a path. It's easier in other countries than, for example, Germany and France. Especially France is very tricky because they at some point adopted all the fairy tales to tell them at court. So it was the most wonderful thing to entertain a noble shortly before the French Revolution. and telling all those tales based on folk tales. So to bring out the original French tales, my God, I found a few in Brittany and I found some, but it was very hard.
It's just so pleasant and pretty.
You know, and it's all made up into an art form. It's interesting because the Bluebeard and some brilliant tales came out of it, but in the Grimms did a very interesting thing that was 19th century. So it is a very bourgeois thing. So they are, you know, like they're like, okay, make this against the nobles, make this against the kings, and then make this some more the middle class coming up. And for example, the hero goes out on an adventure, always comes back, and is happiest at home again. That is the rule for the 19th century. The women, sleeping beauty, waiting for the prince, right? That's all they do. So you will see certain political ideologies sometimes.
Very popular in Victorian times.
Right? And then you look back, and then first of all, Sleeping Beauty for sure was not woken by a kiss. Right? So in the old tales, that goes a little rougher. and it's so you find all these tales hidden in the old, but I just did research. Yeah, but yeah.
You'll find scholars and whatnot who will put up online archives, like
yes.
that's their whole thesis paper, and it's just like, it's awesome.
Yeah, you will get only the peak of it. I would never claim I know fairy tales. It's, yeah, we're shams on this.
Google Books is really good. It's a good place to search for stuff like that. Libraries. I was required by our last panel to always mention libraries as good places for research.
Librarians are amazing.
Yes,
Yes.
we are.
And
Talk to those ladies. They have the power.
they are the priestesses of the book.
I really wish we treated it
Nice.
Yeah.
I feel like when you stare at road, you go right. You're like,
Yes,
yes, I will say my chants and my incense and more people would do it, I'm sure.
That libraries have a, wow, that's really,
But aren't they?
I'm
Right?
quoting everything you say today.
Yes, darling.
Okay. I have a literary dilemma. I have a character and I have a world. And I have outlined and intricated and put in legends of this world. And then I have her backstory and her future, but I don't have her plot. How do you work around writer's block?
There is no writer's block.
Drink. I'm kidding. It's just really a good point. Okay. Sorry, one really quickly. Additionally, there's a wine called writer's block. Do not drink it. It tastes like how I imagine writer's block would be if you distilled it into it. It is disgusting. I thought it was a cure, and no, in fact, it's a cure in the fact that I would rather be doing anything other than drinking this. I'm going to go write.
Bob says you should be writing.
So I don't think that's writer's block because I think that every story is a labyrinth. And she had to listen to that yesterday again. So I do it again in a short version. Okay? I think every story is a labyrinth. The better you get, the bigger the labyrinth is you get. Right? So the better you get as a writer, it doesn't get easier. It's just more complex. So each time you step in, you think, oh shit, it's difficult again. This time it's this time it will lie to me. Okay. So you go in, and the story starts saying, that's the right part.
I'm here.
Hello. And you know, the true hero is this one, here, and it tries to trick you so badly because it tries to hide all its secrets. And you stumble in, and you're like, oh yeah. And then you hit the hedge, and that's the writer's block, or what you call. But it's the best way because you know you went the wrong way. Don't try to go through the hedge.
No, but like, that's what it is. Like
Don't
sometimes
go
that's
through
what
the
writer's
hedge.
block is when you try to go through the hedge when you really should be turning around and looking at
Exactly.
the other path.
So it's the best hint you can get on what the story tries to do to you. So you sneak silently. Try to find another way. And you will hit a lot of hedges, but that's the trick. It should not be easy. It's not supposed to be easy to tell a story. You know, it's the most difficult thing to do. So, yeah, love your days where that happens because you will be on the right path.
Oh, sorry.
No. I'm absolutely.
On a more serious note, not drinking. Sorry, comedic background. Sometimes I have had to have I do crazy person things and have conversations with my characters.
Well, we all do.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. And sometimes I will try to just write a short story with them about their day-to-day just to figure. Often I find out the reason I'm stuck is because this character is not who I want them to be. and I'm trying to put them into something that they don't belong. And then it's like, oh, you wouldn't react that way, so you wouldn't be in this, you'd be over, oh, weird, okay, that's that path. And it's kind of this interesting, like, maybe, and sometimes you find out, maybe you're not the hero of my story. Maybe it's your friend, and I've been way interested in you, and you've been your friend all along. It's the classic love story, really.
There's a quote.
Or that's the thing, don't fall in love with them, right?
Yeah.
Or they will totally trick you.
There's a quote attributed to Thomas Edison where he said that it took him 99 tries to invent a light bulb. And he said, oh, so you failed. So I didn't fail. I discovered 99 ways not to make a light bulb. And it's reminded me of that. When you get to that wall, you just discovered that story's not supposed to go that direction. So that's great advice, by the way. That's fantastic.
I always like them.
We don't have Love Fest up here, don't worry
Yeah,
about
we
that.
are. Oh my God.
I always like Michelangelo.
I saw the pen yesterday.
The sculpture exists, and it's already chipping away.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It exists inside
Right?
the marble.
Yes. Oh, isn't it a good
I
one?
love.
Yeah.
He's a sculptor, not a painter. But
Do you know that one about Michelangelo, right? When they asked him, how did you find
It was
the
always
David?
there. I
And he
just
said,
freed
yeah.
it.
Oh.
You know, the funny thing is I just had this imagination of, or this image of us, just had this talk anyway. It's like, oh, there's people here too. All right. Show it on it, it's awesome.
Something to go look up, which is hilarious. Michelangelo is the only artist who punched the Pope in the face and lived. Favorite fact about that. Sorry, continue.
Were there others that punched the Pope in the face and died?
But maybe the Pope was already
I'm
rather
assuming
old and
anyone
fragile.
else. Yeah. He went into the Sistine Chapel before it was ready. Michelangelo had a temper. I don't think he realized it was the Pope before he punched him, but still.
I did not realize it's the Pope.
Also goes
They have to
Pope.
wear
I'm
that.
assuming that hat was not always a thing.
No.
Maybe he just said that to get out of being
It was back in casual Friday.
He gave the devil the face of the current Pope on the
totally
chapel. So
This is apology.
He might have just really hated it.
My bad.
Like, I didn't know it was you. Sorry.
So I'm curious how you guys feel about so comic books and superheroes is sort of a modern mythology. You're in favor at Comic-Con? Really? No. How they sort of interact with our mythology and with fairy tales and are they sort of the same stories that we're telling as a culture? I feel like there's some crossover. Do you ever want to play with Wonder Woman as well as Alice?
Oh gosh, yes. But that's because DC won't. But one thing, especially about superhero comics, which has been a great frustration with me, but also one of its beauties, is there's no real such thing as comic book canon. They change it every other time, so you have these different mythologies within their own canon, and I find that fascinating. Frustrating, but fascinating. So you're like, oh, this, Peter Parker was doing this, and then he got married to Mary Jane. No, then that was sandboxed, and now that doesn't exist anymore, apparently, because we don't talk about it. We didn't want him married, so now we're doing it. The mindset behind it is almost more fascinating than the stories itself, of like, this is why we're changing it. And it's, I think, very telling of the industry. So very much how you were talking about, it's very telling of our time, of how those tales change. Definitely comic books, and how they evolve is an interesting commentary, not just on society, but how the industry views things, whether it's, well, no one's going to read or go see a movie about a female superhero, or if it's superheroes can't be happy, or et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting to watch that mentality shift through the years from like the 50s when, Superman was America, and everything was going to be great, except some of those offshoots were really crazy.
But with great power comes great responsibility.
Stop it.
For me as a European, superheroes are very strange things, because we don't have them. So we have the gods.
We have Captain Britain.
Okay.
Sorry, that was really hard for me to say.
There is no superheroes in European comics. It's very different. It's an American thing, because Americans believe they can fix the world. And if possible, with one big guy in a suit. And I don't understand that.
It's very telling about our
and with muscles. So I still don't understand why Superman is strong. Why shouldn't they be clever? I'm far more for Doctor Who. Doctor Who for me is a superhero that can save the world. Superman, come on. Are you kidding me? Right? One person who can lift the size skyscraper, how is that supposed to help? And what I don't understand about superheroes also is that they're so often alone. I love them to team up. So my favorite superheroes are Hellboy, somebody like that, you know, and then the strange waterman, that they would need each other. I always need them to need each other. I don't understand the concept of one guy. I don't understand it.
I adore you so much right now.
It's like, wow, lonely
Because
and
if you,
boring.
if
and
you can do it, then you don't need anyone
but
else.
to have that in the oldest democracy in the world is a very interesting thing. So why do you fantasize about this one guy who saves you when you are the oldest democracy and you got rid of a king? You know, this was the boldest thing ever done in human history, and you did not even chop off the heads. Send
a letter saying we were done.
Somebody asked Michael Caine how it was that American producers have done various Batman incarnations, but it took a British director and a British actor to finally do the definitive Batman movie.
Yes.
He says that's because America likes to think they're Superman, but they're really Batman.
Oh, that's good.
And I was like, yeah, well, you say, ooh, but think about it.
Yes.
They're really, really rich, they make everybody afraid of them, and they beat them up with their toys. That's Batman.
That's absolutely true.
I always knew I was.
Yeah, Batman always scares me. That's a superhero that
But it
I
took somebody
think I
from
just want
outside
to get.
America. It took somebody from outside America to see that and bring us to life.
Interesting.
Yeah, probably not
That's
good,
why-
but like he's almost as crazy as all his villains.
Little
Yeah,
bit.
my God. So it's interesting.
Thank you.
Oh, and so, yeah.
What do you think about superhero things? You've been quiet. I'm pointing you out.
I'm quiet.
You're too talkative. We apologize.
I like a lot of the threads that they have in comic books, but you have to also peel away all the layers of marketing and superfluous junk that's in there that, you know, they have to have in there so they can sell it. But underneath that, especially older comic books, some of the stories.
Yeah, and the spirit, for example, I love the spirit. Yeah.
Thank you guys for coming. My question evolves around like the history of fairy tales and how there's kind of a culture that has evolved with parameters. Like I'll give an example. It's like magic and how it like always has a cost. Are there rules that you guys set up in your stories that you feel like you're pulling from history, or do you feel like you're setting up your own world rules as you write your stories?
Well, I think every action should always have a consequence. Just because, whether it's tiny and like, I don't have a pen anymore.
Go and get it.
I could, but that's now a consequence that I have now given myself.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I didn't hate you. That would have been a bigger consequence of, oh, and now I'm getting sued.
Or somebody has one eye less.
I can say pirate in sign language. I know other ones, but they're not very nice.
So, yeah, no, I think I do my own. I think I most don't base them on, for example, if we use them like witches or trolls or fairies, I sometimes do it in my very own way. So I quote only a little bit about what I know from myth, but I tend to not stick to it too much. Because otherwise,
You don't want to be, again, you don't want to be
in a way, as a storyteller, you want to play, you know. So, for example, the trolls, when I do them in Mirror World, I say they are immigrants from the north, you know. So you can only have them in Scandinavia. If they suddenly show up in Austria, they are immigrants, you know. And why did they immigrate? And you have to make up a rule. But that's then my own thing.
I love taking old rules and twisting them just a bit, like on certain mythologies of like, well, how could this have been misinterpreted throughout the years? Like if mythology or fairy tales was a big game of telephone, how did this originally start?
So how do you do fairy? Because you said
Very interesting. They come with their own rules.
You stick
They
to
can't
the rules
walk
that you
over
find.
here or give them milk rules. They have all these
And do you
weird-
stick to those rules?
I draw inspiration from them, but I don't want to be boxed in by them. So I just kind of take the general atmosphere of those rules because they have their own weird taboo kind of atmosphere.
Yes.
And I just kind of twist them to suit my needs. But that way they're not.
Yeah.
wondering if you have any advice for someone who's trying to write a modern fairy tale that is fresh and new and original, that stays true to the heart, and especially when there's so many fairy tales and it seems like, you know, sometimes like, oh, this has already been done before. Like, what kind of advice
Oh,
do you
honey, it's all been done before, and not inspired by Bare Naked Ladies. Thank you.
Now it's a panel.
Okay. So, I would say, let me get away from the Bare Naked
Sorry.
Ladies to where the question is.
The song is now
I
out of
lost
your
it.
head.
I lost it.
Staying true to your fairy tale and
First of all, I think you are the only one who can answer that question. Second, I would say base it very closely on a certain location. So pick a place, a small town, even a mountain, a river, because that's how fairy tale often starts, with a location.
something special to you.
And then you look at that location and you wonder who's there, what is there, is it a good place, is it a bad place, and then you go from here.
After school special stage review.
I'm not sure if any of you have read Marissa Meyer's take on Cinderella. It's a dystopian, futuristic YA novel. I think she's on her third one now.
Is that the one where she's a cyborg?
Yes. Yes. So, it's really great. I love it. I was wondering how you guys have done all this research on fairy tales. How do you see that integrating with sort of from here on a very digital technological society? How do you see fairy tales changing in the future and storytelling going along with that?
I think that anything would change. You know, for example, I just did an app for Mirror World where you can go through the mirror in the iPad and you find all the stories behind it. But what we did is we used 19th century illustration for it, the techniques. We did sculpture, we did music video, we did explain, but we did storytelling just in another way. What I find so fantastic about the digital age is that I could finance that. I could never finance a movie. So I've been through 7 movie adaptations of my books, and not one of them got in any way what I have in my head. So I gave up, and I said, I'm going to do it myself and show what I see. And I love that with the digital media, we can claim back the images. Because at some point, you can, as a writer, afford to show to your readers what your world was.
Let's do our last question.
Okay. I was just wondering how you guys capture the spirit of original storytelling, because that's really where I feel like we all really love fairy tales, is because they're kind of the original way that we connected as humans through these stories. How do you really capture that spirit and encompass it in a novel?
Do you want to go first? I'll go first. You do that. With adaptations especially, I think the easy thing that adaptations do for you is you're able to take something that's already familiar, but you change it just enough so it's only a hint of familiarity, and you're almost looking for you're wandering sort of up through the woods essentially and being like, oh wait, I recognize this, and then it's like you're picking up the breadcrumbs, and I'm honestly not sure how to answer that question. Like, it's just, I don't know, you're just telling me. Right, no,
but it's interesting what you said. You almost take the old story and you put it like a seed into your own.
Let it grow.
So the moment you put the old seeds in, you have the old plants in your garden. So it does feel more substantial than if you all created it yourself, saying, okay. So I think a mix of using plants from the past, planting your own things, or trying to come up with your own thing is the most magical mix. I find it very difficult if it's only about the past. I'm not interested in that.
So you're always going to do that, even if you're not doing an adaptation or something, because you're going to pull from things you've read without even realizing it. It's part of who you are, and it's all going to feed into that. So as long as you're not, I guess, trying to copy something, like just let it flow. I guess and that's.
As a storyteller, you do that anyway. I was in October on a festival. You all have to go one day. It's just amazing. It's called Bukaroo in Delhi, and it's so you come as a writer, from our Western civilization. And then you meet all these Asian storytellers who do nothing but oral storytelling. So they go into the mountains and they talk to the tribes and they tell story. Or when we had dinners in the evening, they broke up out into, do you know the story about the wise woman? I'm like, oh, no, tell me. And it was incredible because of course we don't know about that culture anymore and it's so alive. They told me all about these festivals all over the world for oral storytellers. And they said, oh, Cornelia, if you go to the Cayman Islands, you're paid in fried fish and you live on the beach. And when you go to that festival, you're told that, so yeah, there's so much original storytelling there still. Or what we had to do, for example, on one panel, I think there were 3 Swedish writers, me, and an Indian illustrator. And we all had to tell the story of a child who runs away. So that they saw our different cultures playing. So Urs was the Swedish picture book maker who had written the story. Subir was the Indian child, they painted, and I made it up while I was there. And it was so interesting to see that all come together. So you can do it. You're a storyteller, it will just... I want to get coffee with you sometime. Coffee with you, let's do it. Yes, we always do panels together.
Next time.
And we are sorry we are. We're very close.
Well, we're out of time. I hate saying that. We're out of time. Yeah, I know.
You don't have to say
I'm going to be sad for mine. I'm going to have a little bit of thank you. Hey, but anyway, I want to thank the 3 of you for being here. Whenever you get a chance to... And thank you for being here today, because you guys are awesome. Everybody's awesome. Also, thank you very much. It's not a panel until it appears. And then for the next hour, our 3 authors are going to be next door in the autograph and library room. So if you have more questions or if you have things you'd like them to sign, they will be on hand to chat with you privately. Otherwise, thank you very much. Please enjoy your con. Thank you to our helpers and meetings in the back. You guys are awesome!